having good intentions as an individual doesn't mean you actually live them out all the time. Having good values as an organization doesn't automatically guarantee those values are made real. You remember Enron? Enron, this enormous company in the 1990s that turns incredible profits on paper because more or less they lied about all the money they were losing along the way. Enron's 4 core values, with capital V, values, were respect, integrity, communication, and excellence. So having good values as an organization, whether printed out for the investors or listed in an order of service, doesn't guarantee in any sense that we actually live them out. At General Assembly in 2017, that gathering of Unitarian Universalists from around the country, the UUA, the association's Board of Trustees, announced and chartered the Commission on Institutional Change. The charge given to that commission was to conduct an audit of the power structures, to analyze systemic racism and white supremacy culture within the Unitarian Universalist Association. In other words, the board said, we have this set of really beautiful values as an organization articulated in our 7 principles, but are we practicing what we're professing? How are we living up to, how are we failing to live up to our stated values around racial justice in this moment? These sort of commissions to investigate deeply some particular aspect of our denominational practice, these aren't new. Because of course our institutions, just exactly like us, won't live up to their best selves all the time, right? Without any attention, the status quo perpetuates itself. You don't get different results by doing the same thing. This is James Baldwin saying, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. Well, the charge of the commission wasn't to investigate racists within our association, but to look at systemic racism, to ask whether our congregations and our association treat white folks as if they matter more than people of color. Systemic racism like that isn't about purposeful racist decisions. It's about the organizational culture that makes some people, some voices, some opinions, some practices worth more than others. The board said, in essence, we need to ask if the way we actually act in this tradition matches the values that we say that we have. We swim in the waters of a deeply racist culture. Whatever executive order might prevent me from saying that in government, I can say it plain to you right now. We swim in the waters of a deeply racist culture. A country that treats black and brown lives, people of color, as if they matter less than white lives. It stands to reason that that shows up in our congregations too. Why, then, in the face of real advancement and sincere effort within our tradition around issues of diversity and inclusion, why do we still experience crises and problems and situations where it's just not working? Well, that may seem like a real obvious question, but the commission spent 3 years in conversation with more than 1,100 people that called for testimony from individuals who told stories about how racism has affected their experiences as Unitarian Universalists. They convened focus groups at General Assembly, at regional and district meetings. They came to meetings of professional associations and online meetings, including a focus group of folks who voiced concern about their anti-oppression work. They hired consultants to review key organizational documents. They conducted multiple surveys at General Assembly. And they did data analysis on 650 pages of transcripts and 80 hours of interviews. And it is maybe a surprise, or maybe not a surprise, that they state from the outset the vast majority of people of color and others from identities marginalized within Unitarian Universalism had experienced discriminatory and oppressive. The vast majority of people of color and others from identities marginalized within Unitarian Universalism had experienced discriminatory and oppressive incidents, cultures within Unitarian Universalist circles. Religious professionals, they write, felt these aggressions and attacks on dignity most frequently and most strongly. And those who were white had a spectrum of experiences ranging from denial that any kind of racism existed within Unitarian Universalism. Quote, "We have a 0% occurrence," said one respondent, to those who saw clear issues with equity, inclusion, and diversity, and paid a large cost professionally and socially to name them. The vast majority, they said, that the vast majority of us were people in the middle, vaguely aware, somewhat committed, feeling unskilled. Even so, the commission found that many Black and Indigenous and people of color chose not to participate because of prior experience with information gathering that led to little change, as well as the barriers posed by the large number of people, employed and lay, whose experiences have already led them to leave our association. They write, "We quickly learned that people were reluctant to share their stories. One reason was that religious professionals feared losing their jobs or their abilities to perform their jobs, as did those who identified as white allies. Another reason was that people of color, whether professional or lay, felt that they had told their stories again and again, reliving pain and traumatic experiences to no end. Over and over, they write, we heard from people who said they were no longer willing to describe the pain they experienced because after the initial shock and reaction took place, little changed. Some described this as a form of trauma porn in which those in the majority culture get a voyeuristic look into the lives of Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, and experience deep emotions and failed to act in any systemic way. Altogether, the Commission published 117 recommendations based on an analysis of theology, governance, congregations and community, hospitality and inclusion, what it means to live our values in the world. They analyze religious professionals, education for liberation, innovation and risk-taking, restoration and reparations, and accountability. It's a lot. One consultant suggested, though, look, our experience is that if an organization or an institution wants to learn a few concepts, wants to become aware of some things that had previously been unaware of, then a training or two may suffice. But the Unitarian Universalist Association is already on a path to improve the racial and cultural climate in the organization as a whole, with a hope to impact congregations everywhere. Such a goal requires a consistent effort over time to impact at all the individual and interpersonal levels, as well as the institutional policies, practices, cultural environment, building of community levels. In other words, why so much focus on anti-racism in our association, especially these last years? Why so much communication? Why so many articles? Why so many sermons? Because the way to genuine change requires transformation. It requires a different way of being. It is not as simple as a sermon or a seminar. It's work in every aspect of congregational life and our own lives. So all these concrete recommendations, these 117, come in part because long experience suggests we would much rather think about these things than act on them. like I heard this as a University of Chicago joke, never mind how it works in practice, tell me how it works in theory. The Commission's charge is for us to do the work of practice, of becoming. Reading these recommendations, it's a lot all at once. It's so much. And I felt going through these, that flight or fight response. There's so much. It's paralyzing almost. But the work isn't to do everything all at once. The work of transformation is to go steadily onwards. The poet Philip Booth says, how you get there is where you arrive. How you get there is where you arrive. And the Commission writes, the work of becoming more equitable, inclusive, diverse within our congregations is justice work. If we can't do that well in our own houses, in our own congregations, we can't be effective as justice partners. And I read that with so much emphasis on the work of becoming. It's easy to hear them calling to do our work in our own congregation. It's easy to misunderstand them saying, we can't be effective as just justice partners in the public square until we have finished becoming wholly equitable, fully inclusive, entirely diverse at home. But that is not the point. What makes us partners outside these doors is the becoming, is our commitment to the work, is our commitment to transformation, is our commitment to listen, to learn, to be changed, to talk across the usual borders and barriers of our lives and our pews. To change, to grow. That commitment is a becoming. How we get there is where we arrive. The UUA will create for themselves a 5-year roadmap based on the report, but later this month they publish a congregational action study guide on the report, and I'm excited to read it with you. I want to invite you into a conversation around this, that later in the fall or through the winter, we can get together and read together and talk together about what it suggests. Our mission is to grow our spirits and help heal the world in community. And that's not an endpoint. There's not a threshold where you've grown enough. No one retires from growth in the spiritual path, and no one's too young to start. That work of seeking to understand before seeking to be understood, it's old advice, and advice almost totally ignored in online argument. But seeking to understand, this is an urgent task. The Commission writes, their research reveals today, we, meaning we in our congregations, can barely speak to each other across generations and socioeconomic location. Terms such as white supremacy culture have dramatically different meanings across generations. They say in today's world, it's easy to stay in our comfort zones with communities and communication channels designed to reinforce our opinions so that we have less and less common language among us. We must enter in some negotiation to understand that while we may not use the same words to describe the issues, we must have a shared commitment to the work of building a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive faith. This month, our peace circles begin again, and I invite you into those spaces online where we can show up to listen and speak to each other wholly, fully, and authentically. This fall, our Good Relations team begins the work of workshops on building a covenant, how we'll be together, what those relationships will be like. And I invite you to engage with that as deeply and as much as you can. This is the work of transformation. When asked where the Universalists stand on some social question or another, an old Universalist minister said, "We don't stand, we move." That's our invitation too. That's the invitation of this report. That's the invitation of every one of the recommendations it offers, to move forward, building our relationships with each other, paying attention to the way we engage with each other. I'm grateful to be on this journey with each of you and with all of you. Amen.